All right, we are live.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of the Background Agent Summit. I'm Philipp, and I'm here again with Will.
How's it going?
And for anyone who is new, so this is the first ever virtual Background Agent Summit there is. We have in total 14 talks lined up. Yesterday was day 1. It was mostly about foundations, and we had 7 sessions, mostly focused around infrastructure, security, context engineering. And if you've missed it yesterday, or if there were some technical blips where the quality of the streams wasn't as great, don't worry, we've got it all lined up in HD. We'll send the recordings to you via email, so make sure to go to backgroundagents.com/summit, put in your email address, and we'll send all of the recordings to you. Don't worry. But before we start with today's sessions, we wanted to do a quick wrap-up. So a few themes kept surfacing yesterday that we want to pull together. So the first one is really the foundation matters more than the agent. Unsurprisingly, yesterday was about foundation, so we'll talk a bit about that. So Alistair from Stripe said it quite plainly, actually. He said the cloud dev boxes they had were a strategic credit. And the agent worked because they had reproducible cloud dev environments already. And today we have a session from Uber. So I'll take it a bit away, but he's also talking about DevPod, which is their containerized dev environment that they had been using for years. And since they had these solutions in place, it also allowed them to start very quickly with background agents, right? But for most companies, the infrastructure that they have today, everything is running local. You have manual setup scripts and all of that. And that's exactly the reason why you basically land on the fall summit that we talked about in yesterday's keynote. But wondering, Will, what your thoughts were also on the foundations.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's really interesting to see how some companies that already had good primitives there from the sandbox, CDE, DevBox kind of perspective kind of had that leg up. Whereas the companies that did not had to kind of wind up on the same approach, but from the other direction, right? So Cole, who built OpenInspect, he mentioned that was the single biggest friction point, was that environments themselves weren't actually reproducible. And when the environment wasn't reproducible, the agent wasn't reproducible. So the primitives, the things that build up to and wrap around the agent make more of a difference than the tools that the agent is calling, whether that's rip grep versus grep, or how it's building out knowledge graphs and things like that. So long as the agent can run in an environment that's reproducible, the agent itself is much more likely to be reproducible. I thought that was a really interesting take.
Yeah.
And then that kind of takes us to the next piece, right? Reproducibility is, a lot of that is coming from the world of context. And Patrick at Tessel did a really good talk at the end. If you didn't have a chance to watch that, I would suggest taking a look when we send out the follow-up emails. He defined it as the context development lifecycle. And really tried to strike a good balance of generating, testing, version controlling, distributing, and even observing the context aspects of the agent. What's going into that environment, right? What tools does it have access to? What is the most accurate, up-to-date version of things? And then from Cloudflare, Rajesh did a really good talk about what they called engineering codecs, which were really rigid definitions of how the agent is supposed to work and how the applications that the agent works within work themselves. And those codecs really improved the quality of the agent themselves, right? This was all done in Backstage, which I thought is so cool. There's this kind of ephemeral thing that we were doing for I guess at this point it feels like a really long time, but it hasn't been that long, of IDP engineering and giving developers a way to self-serve. But all of that work has kind of, it was nice to have as a developer, but it's a must-have for an agent.
Yeah, and I think adding to that, so Patrick also coined the term context development cycle, right? So you really have to be very deliberate about how you inject context and when to refresh, etc. So it's not that simple. And I think Quek from Genentech also made a really, really good point here that I want to emphasize. So they let their agent self-serve, right? They put it on a nightly dream, reflect on what it has done, and create new skills and update the existing skills. And that has generally improved the outcome. but also to what they observed is that it really depends on what kinds of skills, right? If it's a more like factual context as to like always go to these Slack channels and like here's the ID and everything, obviously more context helps because it gets there fast. It uses less tool calls. But if it's more a diagnostic context or like open context where you have something around debugging, for example, if you are very rigid with like super long checklists, it actually, you might end up at the same outcome quality, but it just requires more tool calls, it takes longer, it's more expensive. So the lesson really from him was kind of teach the agent what to look at, but not to what to look for. So I found that super, super interesting as well. All right, let's go into the next. Oh, sorry, do you want to add something?
I was saying, yeah, it's important not to over-engineer there. You know, like I feel like there still is the concept of over-engineering, like an API endpoint, like that still kind of goes back to over-engineering the context that you're giving an agent.
100%, yeah. And it's so easy to over-engineer with agents too, because producing is just so cheap. Cool. So let's go into the next theme that stood out. Obviously, security was a big one. We had 2 sessions around that. So that can't be an afterthought, especially if you really go big on autonomy and like don't babysit the agent anymore, right? So we had Leo, Lorenzo, and Chris from our own team who talked about why prompt level guardrails, which most of our local coding agents rely on, keep failing. The agent will just reason around them. And that's why the enforcement really has to happen like a level below in depth. And that's what V2 and DataWall are doing. They have allow and deny lists and scope credentials. And it really is like a kernel level policy enforcement. And we also had Steven from Nono, from the open source side, basically sharing the same principles. And that just drove home the point that security can't be an afterthought, but if you got it figured out, then you can really, with good faith, let the agent run autonomously.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that autonomous running, I think Quek from Genentech did a really good job of talking about the engineering that has to go into the environment itself in order to make it reliable enough to merge to main or to do things where it has a bit more production capability. So like integration tests, canary deployments, feature flags, the types of things that you bring into production data and production systems, if you treat agents the same way by making the environment the governance layer, then you can do a lot more with your autonomy within your, within your own cloud, within your background agents ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. So if the environment is the governance layer, you have the security figured out, then what you can do is basically you can move from software engineering to software manufacturing. That's something that Cole Murray from OpenInspect yesterday kind of coined. He was talking about, using fleets of agents, like overseeing them as an engineer. And that really already goes into the factory analogy that we talked in the keynote, and we'll also hear more about later today. And the interesting thing here is, again, if you have these 2 foundations figured out, then you don't have to be a super technical person to work with background agents, because there's like not so much that you can actually do wrong. You don't even need to know so much about security, right? So if you have those 2 foundations in place, even like PMs or designers can really self-serve more with agents and ship actually code or something else. So we see this at our own company, where we, for example, like the slides that you're looking at, we did them with Ona, right? Like, and a PM did those. So nobody that's like super technical. So I found that super, super exciting, because it's like very empowering. If you got the foundations figured out, like it really extends towards everyone else in the company.
Yeah, and that stretches so far. Like it's more than just even the engineering workflows too. Like the with Quek showing that genomics could be done in a secure way, accessing like really secure classified data, and being able to do background agent tasks on it in a reliable, secure way is so cool. So I love seeing the potential here, So yesterday was primarily about the building blocks. How do we actually build these systems? How do we design the architecture? What sorts of trade-offs do we have to make? And what are the, kind of things that we should be experimenting with, and how are those like leading to other decisions down the road? But today is more about how do we actually ship this within a real organization, and what sorts of changes do background agents unlock? So, yeah, I mean, the questions that we're asking are more along the lines of like ROI. How do we improve the number of PRs that agents generate that you can actually like open and merge that aren't just slop or drafts? How does that impact your review process and things like that?
Yeah, and we're also going deeper into what the end state could look like, if that's at least conceivable. So the idea of the software factory, we talked about that multiple times today. We have 2 talks around them, and I already saw a comment about dark factories sounding shady and fun. So yeah, make sure to tune into that. Shardul's a great guy. So let's get let's pull up the agenda and go through so you know what to expect and when. So we start off with Joey Wang from Harvey, who was the engineering lead behind Spectre, their collaborative cloud agent platform, where really everything evolves around the concept of sessions. Then we have Lawrence from Incident.io, Zach, who built software-factory.dev, a project where he was like running this factory publicly for 2 weeks. Then we have Nick Hill from Uber. We have Shardul from AWS on the dark factories. And in the end, we have Suhail from Monzo, who's talking about adoption of agents in a regulated bank that has, I think, more than 3,000 microservices. So really, really interesting talks.
But yeah, I guess now is the time. We'll go ahead and kick things off for the day. Everybody tune in for Joey Wang and the rest of these talks. It's going to be a really star power filled day.
Make sure to ask questions in the chat. We will forward them to the speakers in case they're not live here, and we will follow up with the answers also via email. Have fun.